We arrived in Minnesota in late January, the kind of winter that doesn't ease you in. Snow lined the roads in tall, uneven walls, packed hard and gray from plows. The sky sat low and pale, and the sun seemed reluctant to stay up for long. By the time we reached the house, it was already beginning to dim, even though it wasn't late. The place was farther out than I remembered from the listing. A narrow road cut through dense trees, the branches heavy with snow, bending inward as if the forest were closing behind us. The house itself stood alone at the end of the drive. 2 stories, weathered wood, a wide porch half buried in snowdrifts. It looked solid, well kept, the kind of place meant to last through harsh seasons. "This is it?" my wife asked quietly from the passenger seat. "This is it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The kids were already restless, my son pressing his face to the window, my daughter kicking at a box near her feet. They didn't seem bothered by the cold or the distance. To them, it was an adventure, a new house, a new place, snow deep enough to disappear into. I parked near the porch and cut the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than I expected. No traffic, no distant hum, just the faint sound of wind moving through the trees. The air bit immediately when we stepped outside. It wasn't just cold, it was dry and sharp, the kind that stung your lungs when you breathed too deeply. We moved quickly, hauling boxes inside, stamping snow from our boots. The house smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but the heat kicked on without complaint. That first evening passed quietly. We unpacked what we needed, ordered food from the only place that would deliver this far out, and ate at the kitchen counter surrounded by half-open boxes. Outside, the light faded fast. By the time we finished eating, the windows reflected only the inside of the house. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the darkness itself, but how complete it felt. I drew the curtains without thinking much about it. The next morning, I drove into town to take care of paperwork and introduce ourselves where it mattered. The town was small, but not empty. A few stores, a school, a post office. Everything sat close together, as if the place had learned long ago not to spread itself too thin. People were polite, friendly enough. At the hardware store, the man behind the counter asked where we were staying. When I told him, he nodded once and said, "That place'll hold up fine in winter," then moved on to the next customer. At the grocery store, a woman asked if we were new. When I said yes, she smiled and said, "You'll get used to the quiet," like it was something you learned by exposure. No one lingered. Conversations ended naturally but quickly, as if everyone had something else to get to, or somewhere else they preferred to be. By mid-afternoon, the town began to thin out. Cars left parking spaces and didn't come back. Lights inside the shops dimmed earlier than I expected. When I checked my watch, it wasn't even 5. The cashier slid my change across the counter and said, "Roads get slick once it's dark." "Already?" I asked. She gave a small shrug. Best not to push it. That was all. Driving back to the house, I passed only 2 other vehicles. Both were heading in the opposite direction, toward town, as if people were making sure they were where they needed to be before night set in. At home, the kids were unpacking their rooms. My wife had started a fire in the living room, more for atmosphere than warmth. The house settled around us with quiet pops and creaks as the temperature shifted. "Anyone want to go for a walk before dinner?" I asked, mostly out of habit. My wife hesitated. "It's getting dark. It's only 4:30. She glanced at the window, where the last light was already draining from the sky. "Maybe tomorrow." I agreed easily. There was no reason to push it. The cold was biting, and we had plenty to do inside. That evening, I stood at the front window for a moment before closing the curtains. The snow reflected what little light remained, turning the yard into a pale, featureless stretch. Beyond that, the trees formed a solid wall of black. There were no lights out there, no distant houses, no moving shapes. The road was empty. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Mornings were bright but brief. Afternoons slid quietly toward evening. By nightfall, the town felt like it had shut itself down completely. The kids mentioned it first. "No one stays after school," my son said one evening, shrugging out of his coat. "They just go home." "That's normal," I told him. "Small towns." My daughter frowned. "Our teacher said not to stay late in winter." "For what?" my wife asked. She didn't say, just said it like it was obvious. At dinner that night, we talked about the cold, about adjusting, about how quiet everything was. We told ourselves it was what we'd wanted: space, peace, a slower pace. When our dog scratched at the back door after dark, my wife brought him inside without comment. "Just easier," she said. "Less mess." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Later, as I stepped onto the porch to take out the trash, the silence hit me again. The cold was deeper now, the air still. The snow didn't crunch the way it had earlier. It absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. I stood there longer than necessary, listening. Nothing answered back. When I turned to go inside, I noticed that every house visible from the road was dark. No porch lights, no windows glowing, just empty shapes against the snow. Inside, the warmth closed around me. The kids were already settling in for the night. My wife had locked the doors, something we'd never been particularly strict about before. "Just habit," she said when she saw me notice. I didn't argue. That night, lying in bed, I told myself what I'd been telling myself since we arrived. It was winter, it was rural, people kept to themselves. Nothing about that was strange. And if the town went quiet early, if the roads emptied before dark, if everyone seemed eager to be indoors by nightfall, well, that was just common sense in a place like this. That was what I believed. At least, it was what I chose to believe, as the house settled into silence around us and the long Minnesota night pressed in from all sides. The rules didn't arrive all at once. They didn't come written down or spoken clearly. No one sat us down and explained anything. Looking back, that might have been the strangest part. Whatever people here knew, they treated it like common sense, something you didn't need to justify. The first hints came through the kids. My son mentioned it one afternoon while dropping his backpack by the door. He said it casually, like it wasn't important enough to emphasize. "They don't let us stay after school," he said. "Since when?" I asked. "Always," he replied, already halfway to the kitchen, "especially in winter." "For what reason?" He paused, thinking. "They just said it's better that way." That was the end of it. Later that week, my daughter came home with a permission slip folded neatly in her jacket pocket. It wasn't for a trip or an event. It was a notice. Winter schedule changes. Earlier dismissals. No after-school programs until spring. At dinner, my wife asked her teacher about it during a parent call. "She said it's always been like this," my wife told me afterward. She acted surprised I even asked. "Did she explain why?" "No," my wife said. "She said winter's hard on kids out here. That was it." "Hard how?" she didn't say. At first, I chalked it up to weather. Snowstorms, bad roads, limited daylight. It all made sense on paper. Minnesota winters were no joke, especially this far north. Still, there was something about the way it was communicated, or rather, not communicated, that bothered me. The kids weren't warned. They were instructed, and they didn't question it. A few days later, my wife went grocery shopping while I stayed home to unpack the last of the boxes. When she came back, she took longer than usual putting things away. "The cashier asked about the dog," she said, her back turned as she stacked cans. "Did she?" I replied. "What about him?" "She just asked if we had one. When I said yes, she told me to make sure he's inside before dark." "That's normal," I said. "Predators." "That's what I thought," my wife said. But she didn't mention coyotes or wolves. She didn't mention anything at all. Just before dark. I leaned against the counter. "Did you ask her what she meant?" "I tried," she said. She smiled and asked if I needed bags. After that, I started paying more attention, not in a suspicious way, just noticing patterns. The town emptied early, earlier than I'd ever seen anywhere else. It wasn't gradual either. People didn't linger or slowly drift home. One moment, there were cars parked along the street. The next, there weren't. By the time the sky started to dim, everything was already shut down. Garages closed, porch lights stayed off. Curtains were drawn tight, even on houses that looked occupied. I noticed it one evening when I took the long way home from work. I passed half a dozen houses and didn't see a single light inside any of them, not even the soft glow of a television. At first, I thought maybe people were conserving power. Then I realized it was consistent. Every house, every night. At home, our routines began to shift without any conscious decision. Dinner moved earlier. The kids stopped asking to go outside once the light faded. The dog stopped sitting by the door at night, even on evenings when he'd barely been out all day. One night, I let him out anyway. It was just after sunset. Not late, not fully dark. The sky was a dull blue-gray, the snow reflecting what little light remained. He stepped onto the porch, sniffed the air, and froze. Not stiff, not alarmed, just still. I called his name. He didn't move. After a few seconds, he turned around and went back inside on his own. I didn't mention it to anyone. A few days later, I heard something outside while taking the trash out. It wasn't loud, just a soft sound in the snow, somewhere beyond the edge of the porch light. A slow crunch, one step, then nothing. I waited, listening. No follow-up, no movement, no wind. When I came back inside, my wife asked if everything was okay. "Yeah," I said, "just cold." She locked the door behind me without comment. At school, the kids stopped talking about staying late altogether. It wasn't even a discussion anymore. They came home directly, day after day, like it was the only option. One evening, my son asked if he could take the dog for a walk. "It's already dark," I said. "I know," he replied immediately. "Never mind." The ease with which he accepted it bothered me more than if he'd argued. I started noticing small things other people did. A neighbor down the road waved once when we passed during the day, but when I slowed to talk later in the afternoon, he gave a quick nod and went back inside without stopping. At the gas station, a man ahead of me glanced at the window, checked his watch, and left without finishing his coffee. No one lingered. No one stayed outside longer than necessary. And no one explained why. When I tried to ask, casually, lightly, the answers slid away. "Just how it is. Winter rules. You'll get used to it." That was as far as it ever went. At home, we adapted. We brought the dog in early. We stopped opening the curtains at night. My wife turned off the porch light after realizing none of the neighbors had theirs on. "I don't want to stand out," she said. "Stand out from what?" Neither of us said. The rules settled into place quietly without resistance. Don't stay out late. Don't leave animals outside. Don't react to noises you can't explain. They weren't spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. They were enforced by absence, by silence, by the way everyone else behaved. And the longer we lived there, the more natural it felt to follow them. That was the part that worried me most. Not the cold, not the isolation, but how quickly we stopped asking questions, and how easy it became to tell ourselves that there was nothing strange about that at all. The first night it happened, I almost dismissed it completely. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug before bed, when I heard something outside. Not loud, not close enough to pinpoint, just a sound in the snow beyond the back of the house. A slow crunch. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. No second step, no shifting weight. Just silence, thick and complete. I told myself it was an animal. Deer, maybe. The woods were close, and we'd seen tracks plenty of times during the day. I finished rinsing the mug, set it in the rack, and turned off the light. The next morning, I checked. The snow around the house was untouched, smooth, no prints, no disturbance. Even near the tree line, where I expected to see something, anything, there was nothing but wind-swept drifts. I didn't mention it. A few nights later, the radio turned on by itself. It was late. The house was quiet, the kids already asleep upstairs. My wife and I were in the living room, the lights low, the fire burning down to embers. The radio sat on a small shelf near the window, something we'd brought along mostly for background noise during the day. It clicked once, then again, then a low hiss filled the room. I looked up as the sound grew louder, the familiar white noise of an untuned station filling the space. There was no music, no voices, just static, uneven and sharp, broken occasionally by faint bursts of sound that vanished before they could form into anything recognizable. I stood and walked over, checking the dial. "It wasn't on," my wife said quietly. "I know." The power light glowed steadily. The volume knob was where I'd left it. I turned it down anyway, then off. The static cut out immediately. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "Probably the cold," I said. "Electronics do weird things." She nodded, but didn't add anything. That night, I dreamed of the sound of snow being walked on slowly, deliberately, just out of sight. After that, the dog started acting differently. At first, it was just barking. Sharp, sudden bursts directed toward the back of the house. He'd stand rigid near the door, hackles raised, staring at nothing we could see through the window. "Probably hearing animals," I said the first time. But then he stopped barking. One night, he let out a low growl instead, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It was uncertain. I opened the curtain a fraction of an inch, just enough to peer into the yard. The porch light was off. The snow reflected faint starlight, pale and flat. "There's nothing there," my wife said behind me. "I know." The dog backed away from the door, tail tucked, and retreated into the hallway. He didn't come back to the living room for the rest of the night. Later, when I checked the yard again, there were still no tracks. No signs of movement. Nothing to explain his reaction. The sounds in the snow returned after that, always at night, always brief. 1 or 2 steps, never more. Always close enough to hear, never close enough to see. I started checking the time when it happened, not writing it down, just noting it. There was no clear pattern. Sometimes early in the evening, sometimes after midnight. Once it happened while I was already outside. I'd stepped onto the porch to check the generator, the air cold enough to sting my face. The snow didn't crunch under my boots the way it should have. It compressed softly instead, muffling sound. Halfway through checking the fuel line, I heard it. A single step in the snow, somewhere off to my left. I turned slowly, scanning the edge of the yard. Nothing. The forest stood still, dark and dense. No movement, no wind. I finished what I was doing and went back inside without lingering. The radio incidents became more frequent after that. Always at night. Always static. Sometimes it would turn on by itself. Other times, it would start making noise while still powered off. A faint hiss that stopped the moment I touched it. Once, I caught a fragment of something beneath the static. Not a voice. Not words. Just a brief, distorted sound that made my skin prickle. I shut it off immediately. At dinner one evening, my son asked if the radio was broken. "Why?" I asked. "I heard it last night," he said. "It sounded weird." "Just interference," I said quickly. "Old thing?" My daughter frowned. It sounded like it was trying to say something. "It wasn't," I said, more sharply than I meant to. "It was just noise." She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced. That night, the dog refused to come downstairs. We found him curled tightly at the top of the stairs, pressed against the wall. He wouldn't move, not even when I called him. When I tried to coax him down, he let out a soft whine and pulled away. "Leave him," my wife said. "He's scared." "Of what?" She didn't answer. We sat together in the living room, the fire reduced to glowing coals. Outside, the wind had dropped completely. The house felt sealed, insulated from the world beyond its walls. Then the sound came again. Closer this time. Not footsteps exactly, more like something shifting its weight in the snow, testing the ground. My wife stiffened beside me. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." We waited. Nothing followed. The dog whimpered upstairs. "That's it," my wife said quietly. "We're not leaving the lights on anymore." "They're not even that bright," I said. "I don't care." She stood and began turning lamps off, one by one, until only a single light remained in the corner of the room. The shadows deepened, the windows turning into black mirrors. I didn't stop her. We talked about it then, carefully, about animals, about weather, about how sound carried differently in cold air, about how electronics behaved strangely when temperatures dropped. Every explanation sounded reasonable. None of them explained everything. "So what do we do?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "We stay inside at night," I said. "That's all." "We already do." "Then we keep doing it." She nodded slowly. We didn't say it out loud, but the decision had already been made. No more stepping outside after dark. No more leaving lights on unnecessarily. No more checking sounds we couldn't see. The rules weren't written anywhere. They didn't need to be. That night, before bed, I walked through the house and double-checked the locks. The dog finally came downstairs, sticking close to my legs as I moved. When I turned off the last light and headed upstairs, the house settled into darkness. Outside, the snow lay smooth and untouched. Somewhere beyond the reach of the porch, something shifted its weight. And this time, instead of listening, I went to bed and let the silence take over. The night it finally showed itself didn't arrive suddenly. It built slowly, the way pressure builds when a storm is coming, but never quite breaks. The air outside was still, unnaturally so. No wind moved through the trees. No branches scraped against the house. Even the usual distant sounds, the faint settling of the woods, the occasional crack of ice, were gone. The silence felt intentional. I noticed it while sitting in the living room. The lights dimmed low enough that the windows had turned into black glass. My wife was already asleep upstairs. The kids had gone to bed hours earlier. The dog lay near my feet, tense, his head lifted, ears angled toward the back of the house. He hadn't relaxed all evening. I checked the clock. Just after midnight. That was when the sound came. Not a step, not a crunch, a drag. Something moving through snow without lifting its weight fully off the ground. The dog growled, low and steady. Not barking, not panicked, just warning. I stood slowly, careful not to make noise. The sound continued, unhurried, circling rather than approaching. Whatever it wasn't lost. It wasn't wandering. It knew where the house was. I moved toward the front window and eased the curtain aside just enough to look out. The porch light was off. The yard beyond was lit only by starlight reflecting faintly off the snow. At first I saw nothing. Then something shifted near the tree line, not stepping forward, adjusting. The movement was wrong, too smooth, too deliberate. I couldn't make out details, only a shape where there shouldn't have been one, taller than the shrubs, broader than a deer. It didn't stand upright, but it wasn't low to the ground either. It moved again, closer this time. The snow beneath it compressed without sound. I felt my grip tighten on the curtain. The dog backed away from the window, tail tucked, retreating toward the hallway. His nails clicked softly on the floor, the only sound in the house. I let the curtain fall back into place. For a moment I stood there, breathing shallowly, listening. The sound stopped. I waited. Then it started again, this time closer to the side of the house. I moved toward the gun cabinet without thinking. I hadn't planned for this. I'd told myself I wouldn't need it, that whatever was out there could be scared off by noise or light, that this was still just animals, even if they behaved strangely. I opened the cabinet quietly and took the rifle out, checking it by touch. The weight felt solid in my hands, familiar, reassuring. Another sound came from outside, closer still. This time I heard more than movement, a faint, wet sound, like something brushing against packed snow. I edged toward the side window and looked out again. The shape was closer now, just beyond the edge of the house. I could see part of it more clearly, not clearly enough to understand, but enough to know it wasn't any animal I recognized. It was long, not tall, long. A portion of it extended forward, then pulled back, as if testing the ground. It didn't move like something walking. It shifted, redistributed its weight, then advanced again. I couldn't see a head. I couldn't see eyes, just mass and motion. It moved toward the back of the house. I followed it from inside, staying close to the walls, keeping the rifle lowered. My heart pounded hard enough that I was afraid it might give me away. At the back window, I paused. The sound was directly outside now. I counted my breaths. Then I lifted the curtain. It was closer than I expected. Near the edge of the yard, just beyond where the porch light would have reached if it had been on. I could see more of it now, though see wasn't the right word. I saw the way the snow deformed beneath it. I saw the way parts of it rose and fell, not in rhythm, not symmetrically. I saw one limb, if it was a limb, extend outward, longer than it should have been, jointed in a way that didn't match any anatomy I knew. That was enough. I stepped back from the window and moved toward the back door. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I raised the rifle and aimed through the glass. My hands were steady. The sound outside paused, as if whatever was there had noticed the change. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I fired. The shot was deafening in the quiet night, the sound tearing through the house and out into the woods. The recoil jolted my shoulder. The muzzle flash lit the room for a split second, throwing harsh shadows against the walls. Outside there was a sharp wet sound, not a scream, not a cry, a reaction. The shape jerked backward, movement suddenly fast and uncoordinated. Snow sprayed outward as it pulled away from the house, retreating toward the trees with a speed that hadn't been there before. I fired again. This time the shot struck lower. I saw something dark splatter across the snow, stark against the white. The thing recoiled again, retreating further, its movement erratic now. Whatever limbs it had moved out of sync, dragging part of itself as it fled. Within seconds it was gone, swallowed by the trees. The woods went silent, not gradually, immediately. I stood there, rifle still raised, breathing hard, listening for any sign it would come back. Nothing. After a full minute, I lowered the gun. The house felt impossibly loud now. My breathing, the soft tick of cooling metal, the faint creak of the floor as I shifted my weight. I checked the windows again. Nothing moved outside. The dog remained hidden in the hallway, whimpering softly. I locked the back door and leaned my forehead briefly against the wall, forcing myself to slow down. It wasn't dead. I knew that. The way it had moved away, fast, purposeful. It wasn't the reaction of something mortally wounded. It had retreated, not collapsed. But it had reacted. It could be hurt. I went upstairs and woke my wife quietly, explaining what had happened in short, careful sentences. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for details. She believed me immediately. We checked on the kids. They hadn't woken up, somehow sleeping through the gunshots, bundled under heavy blankets. Back downstairs, I peered out the back window again. The snow near the yard was marked now, disturbed, torn, and there, clearly visible even in the low light, were dark stains soaking into the snow. Blood. Not much, but enough. My wife stood beside me, staring out at it. "It's alive," she said. "Yes. And it knows we're here." "Yes." We didn't talk about leaving. There was nowhere to go in the middle of the night, no one to call. And something told me that running now would be worse than staying put. Instead, we began to prepare. I closed and locked every door, secured the windows, checked the locks twice. The rifle stayed with me, loaded, within reach. Outside, the woods remained still. Too still. I knew then that whatever I'd driven off hadn't been alone long enough to wander here by accident. And I knew, just as clearly, that it hadn't come this close to the house without a reason. The snow outside would freeze again by morning. The blood would vanish beneath the next fall. But the knowledge wouldn't. We had seen it. We had heard it. And whatever had been watching us from the dark now knew that we were willing to fight back. That realization didn't bring relief. It brought something worse. Because if it could bleed, and still walk away, then the only thing the gunshot had bought us was time. And time in a place like this didn't mean safety. It meant waiting. We didn't sleep after that. There was no discussion about it, no argument, no moment where someone suggested trying. The night had crossed a line, and all of us knew it. Whatever had come out of the woods wasn't gone. It had only been pushed back far enough to reconsider. We moved through the house quietly, deliberately. I checked the windows first. Every one of them. The locks were solid, but I reinforced what I could, wedging furniture where it made sense, lowering blinds and curtains until no light could leak out. My wife followed behind me, switching off lamps, leaving only a single light on in the hallway upstairs. Even that felt like too much. The kids were awake now. Not crying, not panicking, just alert, watching us move with an understanding that scared me more than fear would have. "What's happening?" my son asked. "There was an animal outside," I said. "We just need to be careful tonight." He nodded. Neither of them asked what kind. We gathered in the living room for a moment, long enough to decide how we'd handle it. I kept my voice low, steady, not because I thought the thing outside could hear us, but because speaking louder felt wrong. "I'll stay down here," I said. "Your mom stays upstairs with you. If you hear anything, you don't come down unless I tell you to, no matter what." My wife didn't argue. She just nodded once and took the kids upstairs. When she came back down, she brought blankets and set them near the couch. Not to sleep, just to stay warm. We settled into positions without calling them that. I stayed near the back of the house, rifle resting across my knees. My wife sat closer to the stairs, eyes fixed on the darkened windows. The dog lay between us, pressed flat against the floor, trembling slightly but silent. The first sound came less than an hour later. A soft scrape against the siding. Not forceful, not testing, just contact. I lifted the rifle slowly, every muscle tightening. The sound moved along the wall, tracing the edge of the house. Whatever was outside wasn't trying to get in. It was mapping. Another sound joined it, from the opposite side of the house. My wife looked at me, her face pale. "There's more than one," she whispered. I nodded. They didn't move together. That was what unsettled me most. One would stop, and the other would start. A scrape here, a soft crunch there, always circling, always just out of view. At one point, I thought I heard something above us, not on the roof, closer to the second-story wall, as if something tall or long had shifted its weight nearby. I didn't look. The dog let out a quiet whine and pressed closer to my leg. Minutes dragged by, then hours. The noises never escalated into an attack. No pounding, no forceful attempts at the doors, just constant presence, watching, listening, waiting. Once I heard something that sounded like nails dragging lightly across glass, not scratching, just touching, then withdrawing. I raised the rifle and aimed toward the sound, my finger tight on the trigger. The noise stopped immediately. I waited. Nothing followed. They were reacting to us, not blindly, not instinctively. They were aware. Sometime after midnight, the sounds multiplied. Movement on all sides of the house now, overlapping just enough that I couldn't track them individually anymore. The house felt smaller with every passing minute, as if the walls were closing inward under the pressure of being surrounded. I fired once more when something brushed too close to the back door. The shot echoed through the house, loud enough that my ears rang afterward. Outside there was a brief scramble of movement, fast, disorganized. Then silence. For a few minutes I let myself hope that they'd retreated. That was a mistake. The quiet didn't last. They came back slower this time, more cautious. The sounds were farther out now, at the edge of the yard. But they didn't leave. They settled into a pattern, circling wide, testing the perimeter, staying just beyond where the rifle had reached before. The weapon worked, but only as a boundary, not a solution. My wife leaned closer. "They're waiting." "Yes." "For what?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. The night stretched on, long and uneven. The cold pressed in through the walls, making the air inside feel thinner. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The creak of the house settling, the quiet click of the heater cycling on and off. Once, the radio hissed faintly from the other room. I stood immediately and crossed the living room, shutting it off with a sharp twist. The noise cut out, but the silence afterward felt heavier than before. I imagined the sound carrying through the walls, through the snow, drawing attention. After that, we spoke only in whispers, and only when necessary. Sometime in the early morning hours, the noises outside shifted again. They were closer now, not touching the house, but near enough that I could hear the subtle compression of snow beneath weight. More than one set. At least 3. Maybe more. They didn't approach together. One would move while the others stayed still. Then another would take its turn, as if they were coordinating. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. My wife squeezed my arm. Her grip was tight, almost painful. The kids didn't come downstairs. They stayed quiet above us, exactly as told. I was grateful for that. I wasn't sure what would happen if they heard a child moving inside. The dog remained silent the entire night. No barking, no growling, just quiet, shallow breathing. At some point, exhaustion crept in despite the fear. My body ached from staying tense for so long. My eyes burned. Time lost its shape. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt endless. The sounds never stopped completely. They faded near dawn, thinning out one by one until only the wind remained. Not the unnatural stillness from earlier nights, but real wind, uneven, restless, brushing against the trees. When the sky finally began to lighten, I didn't move right away. I waited, watching the windows turn from black to gray. Only when full daylight filled the room did I stand. Outside, the yard was untouched. No tracks, no signs of movement. The snow lay smooth and clean, as if the night had never happened. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand. The cold air hit my face, sharp and real. The world looked normal again. Too normal. My wife joined me, wrapping her coat tight around herself. We stood there together, scanning the tree line. "They're gone," she said. "For now," I replied. We didn't celebrate. We didn't talk about what we'd do if it happened again. We both knew this night hadn't been a test. It had been an introduction. The long night had taught us how to survive until morning. It hadn't taught us how to make it stop. Morning came slowly. Not the sudden brightness you expect after a long night, but a gradual thinning of the dark. Gray light seeped in through the windows, soft and flat, settling over the house like a layer of dust. I noticed it only because the black of the glass began to fade. None of us had slept. We stayed where we were until the light was strong enough to feel real. Only then did I stand, my joints stiff, my head aching. The rifle still rested where it had all night, within reach, familiar now in a way I hadn't expected. I moved carefully, listening as I went. The house sounded normal again, pipes ticking as the heat adjusted, the faint hum of electricity, no scraping, no shifting weight outside the walls. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Cold air hit my face immediately, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The sky was pale, overcast, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before. The yard was untouched, no tracks, no disturbances. The snow lay smooth and unbroken from the edge of the porch to the tree line. Even near the back of the house where I knew something had stood, where I'd seen blood spill across the ground, there was nothing. I walked the perimeter slowly, boots sinking into the snow. I checked the spots where the sounds had been loudest, the places where something had pressed close to the walls. Nothing. It was as if the night had been erased. My wife joined me outside, pulling her coat tighter around herself. She scanned the yard, then the woods beyond. "They're gone," she said. "Yes." "For good?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the trees. The forest stood still, branches heavy with snow, no movement visible between them. It looked the same as it always had in daylight. Harmless. Empty. "No," I said finally. "Not for good." The kids came outside a few minutes later, quiet and bundled up. They didn't ask what they'd missed. They didn't ask what had been out there. They didn't need to. They saw the way we moved, the way we watched the woods. That was enough. Later that morning, I drove into town. I didn't tell my wife where I was going. I think she knew anyway. The roads were clear, plowed early. The town looked normal. Too normal. People moved through their routines like it was any other winter morning. The grocery store was open. The gas station had a line. No one looked tired. No one looked surprised to see me. At the hardware store, the same man stood behind the counter. He nodded when I came in. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. I didn't know how to start, so I didn't try to ease into it. "Sit." "There was something outside our house last night," I said. "More than one." He didn't pause. Didn't look confused. He rang up a customer's purchase, handed them a receipt, and waited until they left. Then he looked at me. "Did it leave?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. "That's usually how it goes." I felt something tighten in my chest. "You knew." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. "You folks are new," he said. "First winter's always the hardest. You didn't warn us." He studied my face for a moment, then shook his head. "Wouldn't have helped." "What are they?" I asked. He didn't answer that. "Did you get through the night?" he asked instead. "Yes." "That's good," he said. "Means you did it right." I stared at him. Did what right? He slid a box of heavy-duty locks across the counter toward me. Didn't ring them up yet. "Staying inside," he said. "Keeping quiet. Not chasing what you can't finish." He finally met my eyes. "You'll want to reinforce the windows. Basement too, if you've got one." My mouth felt dry. "How long has this been happening?" He considered the question. "Longer than I've been here." "And nobody does anything?" He gave a faint, humorless smile. "We do. We stay." That was the end of the conversation. When I got back home, my wife was already moving furniture. Not frantically, methodically, pulling shelves closer to windows, clearing space near doors. "We need stronger locks," she said when she saw me. "And boards. Maybe wire." "I know," I said. "We'll get them." The kids helped without being asked, carrying things, holding doors, watching the woods through the windows while we worked. By midday, the house looked different. More closed, more inward-facing, less like a place meant for comfort, more like one meant to endure. We talked about leaving. We had to. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, numbers, and quiet truths. The house was our savings, all of it. Selling now would ruin us. Leaving meant starting over with nothing in the middle of winter, far from anywhere familiar. And even if we did leave, I thought of the man at the store, of the way he'd spoken. Calm, certain. This wasn't tied to us. It was tied to the place. "What if it happens again tonight?" my daughter asked. My wife looked at me. "It will," I said. That answer settled heavily over the table, but no one argued. "So what do we do?" my son asked. I looked around the house, at the windows, the doors, the spaces where we'd already begun to change things. "We do what everyone else does," I said. "We prepare." That afternoon, I finished boarding the basement windows. I checked the generator again, made sure the radio stayed off. I moved supplies into rooms without windows, counted ammunition without thinking about why I was counting it. As the sun dipped toward the trees, we repeated the routines we'd learned. Animals inside, lights dimmed, curtains closed. By the time darkness fell, the house was ready. I stood at the front window for a moment before drawing the curtain shut. The snow reflected the last of the light, pale and quiet. The woods beyond waited, patient as ever. I knew then that last night hadn't been an attack. It had been a warning. They hadn't come to kill us. Not yet. They'd come to see how we'd respond, to learn what kind of people we were. We'd shown them. As I locked the door and turned away from the window, I felt a strange, unwelcome certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't the last time, but now at least we understood the rules. Not because anyone had explained them, but because we'd survived breaking none of them. And that understanding meant something else too, something heavier. We weren't leaving. Winter had only just begun,